Welcome to A Matter of Music. I'm Dawn Wisner-Johnson.
And I'm Beth Wisner-Jansen.
And we are A Matter of Music. We are here to help you with tools, education, and ideas to master this crazy business of music. And today we have a very special guest with us we're very excited about, Simon Tam. Can you say hello, Simon?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Simon is an author, musician, activist, and troublemaker is what I actually liked on his little resume that I saw. He's known for a lot of things. Simon started a band, founder and bassist of the Slants, and the world's first and only all Asian American dance rock band. Went on from there. He is now a keynote speaker, an author. He has TED Talk.
I think he has about the most TED Talks of anyone, doesn't he?
Yes, yes. And so you will hear about his journey and how this brought him there a little bit here. Accolades for activism, even joined President Barack Obama and has done so many different things. And some of your, also he's done a lot of nonprofit work, which is, I'm a social justice person, so very near and dear to my heart. So a lot of awesome things that Simon has done, but for our audience, we're gonna clue in today on some things and Beth's gonna take us there. But Simon, before we start, Beth and I wanna tell you, we're sisters, first of all. We call ourselves multicultural because Beth's probably first memories were on an Indian reservation in Arizona. Our parents worked at a children's home there, and I remember going to school at the Indian school on the reservation. So we have an indigenous sister that calls my parents mom and dad. And from there, we went to Malaysia and the Philippines and lived over there in some of our growing up and teenage years. So
we are third culture kids.
We call ourselves third culture kids. So we are drawn to the Asian culture, by the way, the food and so much of it. So we just wanted to give you that background before we get started. So I'm going to hand it to Beth because she is going to.
Did you want to go over his career first, leading up, Dawn?
Yes, let's do that first.
How we were going to do this interview. I'm sorry, people.
Simon, one thing I wanted to ask you about, in doing some research on you, you do share sometimes about your upbringing and your growing up years and being from San Diego. Do you mind giving us a little bit of that background of how you grew up, how you got into music, what bands you were into, what kind of led you to where you started that?
Sure. So I was born and raised in San Diego, California, and it's like as long as I could remember, music was a pretty big part of my life. Like my parents have these home videos of me where I think at age 3 or 4, I would grab my dad's acoustic guitar, jump up on the coffee table and pretend to play and just scream and just, I thought I was putting on a show, even though I had no idea what I was doing. And, I had these cousins that I was pretty close with, but instead of playing games like cops and robbers or hide and go seek, what I would do is I'd get my cousins and my sister and we would actually play band. We would just get pots and pans. We'd get whatever noise making devices we could find. And we would just scream at the top of our lungs because that's what we thought rock stars did. Just set up in the middle of a living room and put on a show. So it was very much in my DNA. And, at age 6, I was offered music lessons, which I was like, yes, I'm going to play guitar. And I didn't know it at the time, but they gave me something with fewer strings and that was smaller. And it turned out to be a ukulele, but I was like, I don't understand why it doesn't make the same sound. And, when I turned 10, I finally convinced my parents to let me choose my own instrument. And that's when I picked up the bass guitar, started taking formal lessons from an old jazz and blues musician for a few years. And then I started jumping into bands, but really those early years were kind of influenced by that, like, I would say the golden era of MTV. So, it was always like Guns N' Roses. It was like that kind of late 80s hard rock sound that I really loved. And then from there, it was a very natural transition into punk music, which I just loved. So bands like the Ramones and there are many, many spin-off bands that sound like the Ramones.
Yeah.
That was
Did
my
your
DNA.
parents agree with your choices in that era?
Well, so my dad actually loved oldies music, and I think he preferred a kind of a lighter sound. And in fact, when I was growing up as a kid, they used to pay me, like instead of getting a normal allowance, I would get paid 50 cents for every song I memorized. So if I could memorize all the words and sing it back to them, they'd pay me for that. And of course, I think this is why I love like punk music, because the Ramones and many bands like that are influenced by 50s and 60s kind of bubblegum, surf rock, oldies, just with kind of a different edge. But yeah, they prefer less loud music, especially when I got into high school.
Okay. Yeah. And did you actually have a band in high school pre the Slants? And I'm sure you were doing.
Yeah, I started playing in bands when I was in junior high, because I would go to this local record shop and just basically say, "Hey, I play bass. Like, do you know anyone that's starting a band or needs a bass player?" And eventually, the guy at the record store who I became friends with gave me the name of this girl named Raquel who was starting a band, and she was about the same age. And we just started getting together and jamming. And then by the time I was in ninth grade, like a lot of teenagers who played music around that age, I was like in 10 bands, just because like there weren't a lot of bass players and there were a lot of guitarists in this town. So, I just joined everything.
Girls go after guitar players, right?
Yeah, that's the stereotype. But that's all right. So like, I got to have a lot of experience playing in a lot of different groups. And in fact, by the time I was in my senior year, I was already ditching school to go on tour. And I started my first record label at age 13, mostly working with local bands and putting on shows, and just got very much into kind of the business side of things, which not a lot of musicians did. Like everyone was like, "I'm going to be the best guitar player out there." And I was like, "I'm going to be the guy who knows how to sell your records, even if you don't know how to get out of the garage."
I love it. And that's as a teenager.
Yeah, that was very much my just things I noticed, because I was like, there's all these bands, but they aren't even getting shows. Like the bands in my high school, they might play at the school, but they weren't doing anything with it. And I was like, how can I figure out how I can work with vendors? So I set up partnerships with local printing companies to do things like create my own CD booklets, stickers, vinyl sleeves, and then I would basically create catalogs that bands could order from. And I put them in every record shop in town. So even though I wasn't working with those bands directly, if they wanted stickers or, printed merch, they can contact me, order it. And then I would just basically like be the middle person and arrange for someone else to order it. But because I was doing bulk orders, I was able to get better discounts and use that money to buy, in the mid 90s, it was a very big deal. My first official CD burner, like, because no one had them. It was like, these things were $700-800, and you'd have to take apart your whole computer tower just to put one in. But I did it, and I was like the first person in my area to like make my own CDs, and then I got them carried by local record stores, and then I just kind of taught other bands how to do that.
Wow. That's why I wanted to ask you those questions, because I thought you were probably doing this from a very early age. Even the bass player, I've been in a lot of bands myself. I was in a band in the 80s, actually, in that whole techno scene. And bass players were always the hardest to come by. And so even in your playing bass, I think you even had that in your brain, that because a good bass player is very hard to find. Many times the guitarists are the ones who say, "Oh, I'll just play bass for you." But to find one who really knows that instrument is a difficult thing. So anyway, and then the marketing that you did, that's incredible. That is
incredible.
Awesome. Yeah. So,
which gives you an insight, which when we get done with this interview, you'll kind of realize, wow, okay, that's how he got started. Because I would call Simon maybe a genius kind of guy. He's one of those guys that, because I look at genius a little differently than some people. You know so much about so many different things because your brain, I think, seems to work a little bit differently than most musicians, which I love because I'm not a musician. So I love the business aspect of what you do, and Dawn loves the other, and you're kind of the whole package. You kind of got it all going on. So
yeah. So let me get him to the Slants. I think I heard that you were in college studying and you left college to start this band.
Yeah, a couple months before graduating on a full ride scholarship and a double major at UC Riverside.
Your parents let you back in the house?
You know, surprisingly, they supported this decision for me to drop out of school and move across the country to join a punk band. So that's what got me to Portland, Oregon. I joined a band called the Stivs, which is kind of like Iggy Pop and the Stooges meets AC/DC. It was a band I was working with as a promoter. Like I took a lot of the photography that ended up on album covers and things like that. I would kind of book shows from up and down California, and I just became pretty good friends with them. And I was used to joke around with them all the time, saying like, "Hey, you know what would make your band better if I was in it?" And one day they decided, like, "Yeah, let's just have them in the band." So
Wow.
we
Smart
rotated.
band too. Smart band to get a promoter and marketer in there.
It was fun, and
Yeah.
I had a good time with them, and it would only last about a year and a half, and then I had
Yeah.
an idea for a new band. And right around that time period, it was a group of younger guys, and I don't think they totally got it. They wanted to be rock stars, they wanted to have fun, but they didn't want to like work for it. And so it frustrated me because I was going all out. I was, putting a lot of hours in, and they would just show up to practices late or gigs late or blow things off. And after a while, it's like, look, if you're not going to take this seriously like a job, like I abandoned my whole career for this, like then I don't want to be a part of it. I want to be a part of a group that people actually take this thing seriously.
Simon, I hear that in so many musicians that are later musicians that have stuck with it. Many times you have to abandon some people along the way because musicians sometimes think it's going to be easy. And this is one of the things that Beth and I have a vision for in what we're doing is we're trying to help up and coming musicians understand everything about the business so that they can continue to move forward, whether they're actually doing those things or not. It's important to understand what is going on, what contracts you're signing, what people are doing with your music. It's imperative. And in our age right now, in the digital age, it's just, you must do it. So
you must understand it at minimum, even if you have somebody else doing it, or else,
right.
I mean, even the bands in the 80s and 90s that got, everything stolen from them because they didn't, they weren't watching out for what their accountant was doing or their record company or something. Just having that full understanding of it, even if it's somewhat cursory, but understanding what you're doing and how the business works is nowadays, especially, you just can't get away with not knowing. I think you're not going to be successful if you do.
Yeah, I think that I always tell musicians that, like, imagine that you're running a business, and because you very much are. Like, would you just sign a lease without actually looking at the terms? Would you go into partnership and risk everything that you had with a bunch of strangers who you're not sure if they're committed or not? You probably wouldn't do that, but yet bands are popping up every single day and they're doing this very thing. I mean, whenever I work with bands, I always ask them, like, in the first meeting, what's your inner partnership agreement look like? What's your band member agreement? And 90% of the time, they don't have one. So I'm like, okay. I was like, then you don't have a band. You don't have a partnership. Like, according to the law, you got nothing. And if you all pitch in money to buy a PA system, or you do this and that, you put out an album, it's going to get real messy if something were to happen, if there's some kind of disagreement.
Right.
And I hear people say, but we want to keep it chill, man. We want to be friends. We're just friends. Okay, if you want to remain friends with your bandmates, have a partnership agreement. That way everything's out in the open. It's already put down. There's no disagreements. Otherwise, you are going to lose your friends eventually.
Right.
Absolutely.
And if they ditch you when you give them those agreements, then you go the other way.
Yeah, but that's a good way to keep a friendship, is to actually have it all laid out at the beginning.
Yeah, because then you could say, okay, what's something that we can all agree to? Like, what is fair for everybody? And we won't sign this until we can all agree on these terms. So that's how you get the things that are the most fair, that are most important to everybody. And then you realize what people value if you're on the same page when it comes to your goals. And you can set expectations in advance so that there aren't hurt feelings in the end when, say, the singer's upset because they don't get a bigger cut, or like the person that doesn't show up at rehearsals, like they realize, oh, I might be in danger of my position because I'm not putting in as much effort or money in as everybody else.
Yeah, for sure, man. I had that. I had a band in the 90s and we didn't have agreements. It was all friends. And there were some times that I had real issues that we had to address. And it was hard, so much harder to do it later than once you had the person in. And, you know, so, and even I had already been in a touring band. I had done CDs and all of this stuff. Start this new band. And I'm just like, we're all friends. Let's just hang out. And so I kind of learned the hard way, experience wise, but I'm hoping that some of the information we can give out to people today, they can learn from those who've gone before. So on that note, Beth, Simon, you didn't get to the Slants. Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
Slants, how did that band form? And
Well,
how did you come up with the name?
So I just saw the lack of representation in the music industry. I mean, the early 2000s, this is like pre-YouTube or Facebook or anything like that. Very much like if you wanted independent music, like you had to go out and find it. There weren't a lot of publications, and the few that existed weren't covering Asian American acts. Like we just weren't visible at all, even though there are like almost 20 million of us. So I wanted to change that by starting a band that would provide a bold portrayal of the culture, and to like give somebody somewhere out there, like some kid that could look up and say like, oh, I could do that too. And so that's why I ended up starting the band. We called it the Slants because I wanted to provide our slant or our perspective on life of what it's like to be Asian American, to navigate this music industry, and at the same time kind of bring some attention into flipping this old outdated racial slur and this like stereotype about the Asian community. Cause like we don't all have slanted eyes, and not, you know, Asian people aren't the only people on the planet with any kind of slant to our eyes. So why not like call it out, and at the same time use a band name that sounded like something Debbie Harry would front. Like this is like a very like new wavy punk kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was just a great fit. And I started with the idea first. It took me 2 years to get anybody else into the band because there are not a lot of Asian American musicians in Portland, and I am very particular about who I work with, or at least by that point, because kind of like we were saying with these interband agreements, like you're not going to go very far if you only get people that play instruments well. You need people who have the right attitude as well, who have the right approach. So like I kind of refined this process over the years, but I wanted to make sure that we were going to go towards the same, like working towards the same vision, same goal. And I mean, it got to the point where by the time I was like about 10 years into this band, whenever we needed to find new band members, I created an application page on our website. People had to fill out like a 3-page application with like essay questions, talking about their life goals. We had like, if they were married or in a significant relationship, we had to meet their partner to make sure they were on board with how much we were touring and the attention we were getting, like all those things. Because I was like, I don't want to be spending all my time and getting someone invested into this project only for them to bail later on because turns out it wasn't what they were looking for. Like I didn't want to waste my time on that.
Ask the Yoko Ono question.
Well, you know, I think it worked out pretty well. So like if people were joining and they were married, we actually had them meet like other band members who were married, and their wives would say like, this is what it's like for us. This is how we handle it when we feel lonely. Sometimes we get together. No, you can't go on tour the whole time with the band, things like that. Like we needed to address these things in advance so that you could just kind of overcome any of that resistance that might come in later. Like what's the point of like working with, say, a drummer for 6 or 7 months only to have their significant other say, you know what, I don't want you to go on tour. It's like, it'll set you back a lot further than those 6 or 7 months, especially if you're starting to get gigs lined up.
Man, once again, I have to say, these are the problems I had in my bands. Exactly what you're talking about. I'm like,
Dawn right now.
Why didn't we think of this? Well, you know, when we got our second guitarist,
and you're all up here, Dawn. I just want to have fun.
We got our second guitarist in the first band I was in, that was a touring band. We had recorded CDs, the whole deal. We really made the decision based on his hair.
And, you know,
I
this
mean,
happens all the time though.
I know.
Like, because they're like, wow, they like the same music, or they have the right look,
Right.
or they just seem fun to hang out with, whatever. It's like very much an emotional decision.
Yeah.
But
Is that Bobby Dawn?
No, I'm talking about Dookie.
Oh, Dookie in that band. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was bad. Yeah.
It turned out he was a great addition to the band, but
it could have been.
And his wife was amazing. So, and the wives all hung out, like you said, at home, and none of them wanted to jump on the bus. They would be like, no, I don't want to go do that. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. But then, so Beth, go ahead. You can
Okay, so you've named your band the Slants, very purposeful, with kind of a two-tone, you know, pointed at two directions with the word. You're taking it back, and you're taking ownership of it. And so you go to trademark your band, which I want to talk about a little bit later why you did that. But first, I want to talk about what happened when you went to trademark your band called the Slants. What happened to you when you put in your application?
Well, the trademark office rejected our application because they said that our name was disparaging or racist towards Asian people, which obviously was ridiculous. But
right. Did they? Now they said that. From my understanding, I've listened to all the court cases, and I just have to tell you up front, my son, about 2012, he was 12 years old. I homeschooled my kids, and they're a little bit weird. He will come into the room with this look on his face every day, and I'm like, what did the government do now? You know. And he brought your case when he was 12 to my attention, and he was like, you would not believe what they're doing. And so we followed your case all the way through the Supreme Court, my family. So we were jumping up and down when you won. So what was their reasoning? Just you're disparaging Asians because you're an Asian?
Yeah, well, we started asking questions like right around that, because we're like, wait, if slant is this like inherently disparaging term, or if it's really racist like you claim it is, how come you gave it to everyone else? Because the trademark office actually registered it as a trademark almost 800 times by the time they got to me. So I'm actually the only person in US history to be denied a trademark under this law. And so we said, well, what is it about this band that's different from everyone else? And the government came back and said, it's because you all are too Asian. And in other words, like their actual words were, it is incontestable that the applicant, which is me, is of Asian descent and part of an Asian band. Thus, there's an association with this term, like the, you know, potentially racially charged term. But it's just a more convoluted way of saying like anyone can register the Slants as long as they're not Asian. So in the name of fighting against racism, they decided to deny me rights based on my race, because their whole rationale was like, well, you know, we were getting a trademark for live performances by a musical band. You can't change the look. Like if you saw us on stage and you saw the words the Slants, the government argued you would automatically think racial slur instead of the other more common definitions of the dictionary. And so that's why
there's a part of trademark law called the Lanham Act that basically says you can't do a trademark that is disparaging. You can't do a negative trademark. It has to be positive.
Correct.
It has to be a positive thing. And the part of the argument has always been like, well, we have to put this in a book, we have to give it to other countries, and we don't want to put disparaging. But they basically, it's like so 1984 to me, because they basically flipped it on his head and said, everybody but you.
Yeah, and the argument, when you actually look at it, doesn't really make sense, because the argument was like, oh, this is government speech. Like if we give you that little R with a circle on it, people are going to associate it with the government. I'm like, what about the like literally thousands and thousands of registrations for porn companies and their very creative titles? Like you stand behind that? Like how is any of that less like demeaning to people than the Slants, which is an anti-racist band that's doing like a work of empowerment, and oftentimes on behalf of the US government. Like, right. You know, that was the really strange thing, because whenever the government needed help reaching out to the community, they asked us. Like when there's a string of suicides and you know, cases of bullying in the military, for example, when people are taking their lives because just the harassment that the Asian American soldiers were experiencing, the government asked us to come in to help do outreach for the military on bases across like the Eastern Europe theater. So it's like, hold on, like if we're really that racist of a band, you seriously wouldn't be asking us to do this stuff. So they knew it was kind of like, it was more in name. They wanted to make it look like they were doing something about like the growing social unrest in this country without actually addressing the problem.
Right. It's always kind of a white herring kind of a thing, red herring.
Of course, because if they actually cared, then they would have canceled the registrations of the KKK. But they protected them for over 100 years, saying like, oh, this is I think they called it a respected historical organization. And I was like, yo, these people, this is not, nobody would think that.
So what is, but we can never have any more movement and growth. Okay, got it. Very strange. So you decided, now most people in this situation, this is why you're kind of a little bit of don't take this word too much, of a hero to me, because most people, you know, I'm like, man, I would love to have something, you know, take this to the Supreme Court. I'm going to make a federal case out of this. Everybody says that, or at least in my family. Everybody's always like, we're going to make a federal case out of this. And then we never do anything. You know, I don't even complain when, you know, somebody does something, Apple does something I don't like. I never really complain. You decided you were going to go through with this. You were going to keep walking, and you were going to push this and push it and push it. Now, when you first went to argue it, it was denied on a 14th Amendment basis, right?
Well, we were kind of initially appealing based on like evidentiary and procedural arguments. So basically the Trademark Office screwed up their process in this. And when we appealed to the Federal Circuit, which is right below the Supreme Court, we said, hey, not only did they mess up all this evidence, but there's two constitutional issues here. One was the First Amendment issue, like you're limiting my freedom of expression. And the second is a Fifth Amendment. It's related to 14th, but in the way it was structured.
But it was Fifth.
It's basically due process. Like you can't deny someone rights based on the race. Procedurally, that's what the Fifth Amendment comes in.
I'm thinking 14th this whole time, equal protection. But
yeah, it just depends on how you frame it legally. So the government basically said, we don't care about any of that stuff. We just want to hear about the First Amendment. Is this law actually constitutional under the First Amendment? And we argued, no, it's not. So the Federal Circuit agreed with us. 9 out of 12 judges struck it down. Like federal court said, like, okay, disparagement provision is gone, but they didn't give us the trademark registration because the Trademark Office and their new BFFs, the Department of Justice, filed suit, and they actually dragged me to the Supreme Court and had to argue it again there. So that's kind of like, I wasn't necessarily going willingly in that case, but I kind of had to.
Now you're being drugged behind the wagon. You started in the seat. You're being drugged.
Simon, I have a question on that. So as Beth just said, now you're in it, and you're really in it. And what were you, was there ever a time when you were like, what am I doing? How am I here? Or were you just like, we're going?
It was back and forth. I mean, there were a lot of days where I was like, what am I doing with my life? This is not worth it. I mean, it's, even though I had pro bono attorneys, it's just the amount of money it takes to go through the legal system is ridiculous. Like if I actually didn't have the attorneys donating their time and other people helping me out, it probably would have cost at least $1 to $2 million to get to the Supreme Court. So obviously not feasible, but still I would get like printing bills for court papers for like tens of thousands of dollars. And it would basically, I had to walk away from being a full-time musician to take side hustles so that I could pay for all those bills. And when you're looking at this like enormous bill, you're just thinking, is this even worth it? At the end of the day, is it even worth it? Because like, what am I getting out of it? But I also knew at the same time how the law was being used. Like if you did a survey, if you looked at the studies around the law I was fighting against, it showed that the law was almost exclusively applied to people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, and women, because those tend to be the groups that reappropriate language and say like, you know, this was once offensive to me, but now I'm going to wear it as a badge of pride. And that made them all targets under this law. So I was like, I don't want anyone else to have to go through this, because it's so like, I mean, it's actually pretty awful. Like the
Emotional
humiliation of
as
it.
well as time consuming, money. It's everything. It almost, I imagine, can consume your entire life.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, it was killing me. It was, and the thing is, it affected artists even more. And so there was like a whole bunch of other artists who had something similar. For example, in Denver, there was a feminist comedy hip hop group called Harpoon Tang, which, you know, they had a great following. People thought it was hilarious. They were denied. And in Seattle, Washington, some friends of mine, they're in this amazing women rock band called Thunder Pussy. They were denied. But like nobody was like saying like, oh, these are like really, truly offensive, because they were owning it. They were doing really awesome stuff with it. And on top of that, those same phrases were actually registered trademarks from pornographic companies. So we're like, you're already giving this thing out. Why not give it to people who are actually doing something meaningful with it?
Doing something positive with it, not negative.
Yeah.
Because it's their argument is it's going to be negative, but in reality, what they were accepting was a negative thing, and they were denying things being used in a positive way. They just couldn't see it.
It's what happens when you allow somebody in power to choose winners and losers. Like they're like, these things are good and those things are bad. And you can't have rules like that change depending on who's in the
Right.
office.
Because it's the guy at a desk who gets your application.
Correct.
Chooses. Right. So basically the argument was that you can't have the government decide, you know, what is good and what is bad and what is disparaging based on the government's speech. It's not, the government isn't, it's not their speech, it's yours, right?
Yeah, especially because the evidence they use was like a joke. Like literally, the only evidence they had was urbandictionary.com. And when I brought to them, you know, an editor at the New American Oxford Dictionary, 2 independently verified national surveys, academic professionals, incarceration camp survivors, activists and community leaders, like thousands and thousands of people signed on to my brief. The government said that's not good enough because we found this entry on urbandictionary.com, which was a joke. And that's all they had. But with that joke, it was enough to basically wipe away the voices of thousands of people.
And so, which is why you won in an 8-0, because there were only 8 Supreme Court justices at the time. You won 8-0. You won that case 8-0, which when there's a 8-0 or 9-0, that is basically the court basically telling the government, and it's usually against the government, like, stop it. Don't do that no more. It's very much a slap on the wrist of a child, somebody acting like a child. So you won the case.
But wait a minute, I was listening to a story that you had told on one of your talks about being in there in the Supreme Court. Can you tell us how that happened? Because we all know who just passed away recently, but when you told the story, I literally got chills about what she said and how that happened. Can you tell us real quickly how it was going in the Supreme Court and when you weren't able to talk and you felt even more silenced? Explain that to us real quick.
Well, you know, I was a really big fan of the Supreme Court, and I was like, this is really cool. How amazing is this? And I thought, you know, people ask me all the time, well, what's it like? What's it like being in the room? And as I'm sitting there, the arguments began, I realized I'm actually really frustrated because you have all these non-Asians arguing about what's offensive to Asian people. And the only Asian people in the room are not allowed to speak, which is very ironic considering the fact that I'm in the nation's highest court fighting for freedom of expression. You know, in that room, I can't say a thing. And so as they're making these arguments, I realize that how I actually feel in that room is invisible. I feel insignificant. I feel like it does not matter if I'm in the room at all, even though my name is literally on the docket. Like this case is just about me and my band. But about halfway through the arguments, you hear this little voice pop up, and it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she says, doesn't it matter that the slants are Asian? Like everyone knows that they're not using the word to disparage, but to describe and to remove the sting from the term. And instantly I felt seen. Like I remember like looking at my guitarist who's sitting next to me. I was like, yo, I think I'm in love with the Supreme Court justice, like Notorious RBG. Because at that point, like I was already a fan of her work, but I realized something. When I felt seen, I realized that was the work she'd been doing. Why she was such a big rock star, why documentaries, why films were made from her, because through her dissents, through her work, people felt seen. Women who didn't have a voice, who finally were kind of working towards parity in terms of, being able to enter the same space as the men and being able to have similar incomes and dignity, like they felt seen. And I realized should be what the court does more often. That should be what the government does more often, but it oftentimes does not, because they're so busy focused on their own power or even their own privilege, to the point where they don't interact with people from the community, that those people they're like me, they felt invisible. But that was like, for me, the turnaround moment where I realized, okay.
Very good analogy about voting and having your representation, because you don't have a voice in the Supreme Court when it's your name on the docket, like you said. Yeah. You don't have a voice in Congress. You can't stand on that floor or the Senate and speak. So you have to vote for people who represent what you want to say.
Yeah, and for people who actually do have a platform. Yeah. Like if you have a platform, why it's important for us to use that platform responsibly to help others be seen. At the end of the day, like, people right now, there's a lot of conversations in our country around like justice, racial justice in this country. And I'm like, when you think about like what you actually define as justice, I like to think about it not in terms of equality, but in terms of dignity. Like, people have this inherent right to dignity. And that's what the law should be doing. It should be protecting that right. And so when you see that people are being treated like inhumanely or with deference, now when you come back to it, you realize it's because those laws aren't affording those people dignity. They're not getting the process that they deserve as a citizen or as a human being. And when that happens, of course, people get stirred up. And that's why you see so much outrage about a lot of the things happening in our world, because we see it when we're like, something about this doesn't feel right. And that's why, we need to come in and actually do something about it.
Yeah. And one more thing, as you left the court, there was a crowd outside. I like this story too. And these two young men come up to you. What happened? What was that? What happened in that situation?
It's actually a boy and a girl. They're teenagers, freshmen in high school. They run up to me and they told me that they flew from California to be there. They're like, we're freshmen in high school. And because at that point, I'd been in this court case for 8 years at that point. And they said, for our whole lives, we heard about you. We heard about the one who's willing to fight for our community, for us to decide what's best for ourselves. And they told me that because of the work of my band and what I had been doing, that they themselves were interested in that work, that when they graduated high school, they would study public policy development in college, and that they would run for office and one day change the system that I had been fighting against.
Awesome.
And I was just
that is so amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm so excited.
That is amazing. That is incredible.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible that they knew what public policy development was in high school. I was like, what? This is incredible.
Yeah. Because isn't that why we all do so much of what we do? We want to influence people. As I mentioned at the beginning, Beth and I started this because we have so much information from our decades of experience in the industry. It's like we can help people, and we started doing it when we were all in our homes and just free Zooms and things like that. And then suddenly I was like, wait, I'm getting all these questions. People are asking me to help them with this and this. And we just said, let's just do a podcast. We've been talking about it for years. And so the main reason is, we have enough information to help people. So why shouldn't we go out in our careers and do that? Instead of Beth was sitting in an office working somewhere. And it's like, let's do something else with the information that we've been given and the experience. So anyway, back to Simon. Beth, you can continue.
Okay, so back to the impetus that started this whole thing. You went to Trademark your band. I don't think most bands do that. And I don't know how big you were. And can you explain the benefits of getting a trademark for your band? Because a lot of artists know copyright, maybe a little bit about that, but they don't really know trademark probably.
Yeah, so trademark registration is actually fairly common, especially if you're an artist working on a national level, because you have to be able to protect your IP, and your name, of course, is one of the most important things to protect, because we've all heard stories of band names needing to change because of some conflict, and you want to take care of that early on, just like the inter-band agreement, so that you don't have a problem when someone else claims that they're using that same name. So trademark registration protects you against those kind of problems. It also ensures a lot of the important deals that you'll need to make as an artist. So most major record labels will not sign you unless you can have a registered trademark for your name. Some licensing agencies, same thing. They want to make sure that they're working with an artist that is like taking care of their IP very, very seriously. So that's kind of the main reasons why. And it's not that much. Like if you want to do a national trademark, you're looking at probably a few $100s, maybe $500 or $600 if you have an attorney working through it. If you're doing a statewide registration, it's usually less than $100. So it's pretty affordable. It's kind of routine. And the earlier you get started on it, the better.
Because if you guys had gone out and done a few records and you'd never toured to, say, Vermont, and you happen to find somebody who, for whatever reason, named their band the Slants, for whatever reason, you might go to tour in 5 years in Vermont and have an issue with that.
Yeah, trademark rights it's called right of first use. So whoever uses it earlier, if they can prove it, and because they're done state by state, you might have toured half the country, but if you had never been to Vermont or Alaska, then you could actually be sued for using the name if they actually proved that they did it earlier. And what ended up happening for us, like a big reason why we sought our registration, is because shortly after we started, we had 2 other acts calling themselves the Slants, one in Colorado and one in Arizona. And in fact, we had another act who were actually literally taking our music and posting it and as their own. So we were already dealing with copyright issues. And so we're like, let's just take care of this trademark thing while we can, get the registration, prove that we actually had it earlier so that we don't run into this as an issue later on.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
All right. So Don, did you want to get into some of his other?
Yeah. How did this Supreme Court case affect your band, the Slants? I know the answer, but if you can, and most of us probably can guess the answer. There was so much that you had to do, and bands, there's so much bands go through. But anyway, explain how that kind of affected the life of the band.
Well, I mean, there's good and there's bad, like many of the things that happen to us in our life. The positive thing that a lot of people saw is just this massive wave of press. I mean, we got thousands and thousands of features all around the world. Like I think 125 countries had some pretty big story on us. We were on the front page of every major newspaper in America, got to be on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Time Magazine, Rolling Stone, like all of these things that, when I was younger and starting this group, I never even imagined I would be talking to these people. And actually, in fact, people would tell me like they're never going to feature an Asian band in like Pitchfork or Rolling Stone. And here we are now. The downside, of course, is that like not everyone who reads a news article is going to go out and buy an album. And still, it's a pretty major case. So it's exhausting, like financially, mentally, emotionally. I got to a point where I was spending probably more time working on the law case than I was on our music. And unfortunately, that frustrated a few band members who decided to leave. So by the time I stepped into that courtroom, I was the only original band member left. And while I had a new group and they were really supportive and they're on board with the mission, it just wasn't quite the same because they didn't have those same early memories that I did with everyone else. And while I wish they could have been there with me, and many of them were like supportive in spirit, they decided that they wanted to join a band to play music, not necessarily a band to like spend half their time poring over legal documents. Sure. And so, yeah, it cost me several band members and friends, unfortunately.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, and it actually sent you on a path to TED Talks and all of these things that you were able to do. It gave you a new, really
a new
business
venue.
side of your business, you know, but I totally see from you explaining your early years that you were really meant to do this kind of work. I mean, you know, I've even heard you say in some of your, sorry, but I drive a lot, so I listen to things in the car. So coming up to this, but I remember hearing you say that you've even talked to lawyers and helped explain issues to them, even though you are not a lawyer, you know, and from your
I
experience.
spend a lot of time now
Yeah.
speaking at law conventions, doing trainings for judges and lawyers, which is weird, but you know, it's part of the thing. And I think that's kind of always been a part of like who I was. Like I just figured out like how to adapt to a current situation. Like when I first started the Slants, really early on, I figured out, hey, there are like a lot of conventions around this country that are really obsessed with Asian pop culture. Like anime conventions are all over the country, and no one knew how to like perform at them in any real kind of way. Like some of the bigger ones would fly in bands from Japan who did like anime theme songs. But I was like, I got this like dirty, gritty DIY punk rock attitude. I'm hitting them all up. So we started touring and playing at anime conventions, which was amazing because there'd be thousands and thousands of people in attendance. I, you know, and figure out how to get into that system, and oftentimes would sell like hundreds of CDs in a single show just from doing those events. And it allowed me to like build a career out of it, and to have a band that like got paid and had a bus and everything like that. And by the time we got to the legal battle, you know, spending a lot of time in these circles, and I started getting asked to speak at like law schools and that sort of thing. And I thought, hey, you know, what'd be really cool is if you had the band play at your law school and in your lawyer's office. And so we started booking law offices, which pay a lot better than anime conventions, you know, because they're just lawyers who want to like have a t-shirt say like, oh, we had that band in our office. And so, I mean, we'd be playing like these most incredible places that I never imagined I would as a musician, like in offices that look down on Lady Liberty, like the Statue of Liberty, or over the harbor of Seattle. And we'd play for these law conventions, and I'd, you know, fly to like China, Australia, like all these different countries around the world, because they'd be like, oh, we would love to hear you like talk about the case. I'm like, you know what? I will give you a discount if you hire my band. And that's how I wanted to do that, because I didn't want it to just be like me, like talking about these experiences. I wanted to still be able to provide for my band members, and so that they could have an income.
Yeah.
Otherwise I would just be out on the road by myself. And, you know, my mission has always been to promote our music, not necessarily like to use the story. So I thought, how can I get music tied into this, you know, whatever role I'll be asked to participate in, whether it's a panel and like a law panel, or just be a keynote speaker at like a bar association. I always told them, like, make your event memorable, like actually have this like dance rock band as a part of like law history. And every time they did it, they would just love it, because everyone would just rave about it. Like, wow, you know, because they normally have like really boring presentations.
Yeah.
Sure. And now, recently you partnered, I don't know if it was a partnership, but with CD Baby, and did a 6 months or maybe longer with 3 DIY artists, and you helped all of them with some of your marketing tools that you've learned over the years. And I saw some of that as well. And oh my gosh, I was like, this is awesome. Mentorship with these bands from somebody who's done some of these things. And one of the phrases that I really like that you have, but you can speak to the CD Baby in a minute, this may tie in there, is micro, not macro. And it means a lot to me, because I've done a lot of marketing over the years, and it's really hard not to try to go macro, where you're just, we got to reach the world. There's so much we have to say. But I have noticed, even in our short 2 to 3 months of being a podcast, and I've told Beth this, when I interact with people, which is my favorite thing to do, even though it takes me time, that's when we start getting more clients. And so I even got a lot out of listening to some of these things. But speak to that project that you recently worked on with CD Baby. I saw some of those artists. One was even underage, where you had to bring in her parents and sign the contracts and things. So tell us how did that come about, first of all?
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, I started a nonprofit, and so a lot of my focus has been on that. So we have the Slants Foundation, which aims to provide artists of color with mentoring and funds, because it's so hard to get like arts grants these days. And a lot of times you just get the money and are expected to produce a project, but you don't really have direction. So we wanted to bring in both and provide like this wealth of resources for artists to have knowledge and how to build a scalable and sustainable career. I had been doing that for some time and speaking at the DIY musician conference that CD Baby holds every year. And I've been to a lot of like music business conferences, and every once in a while, I'm sure if you've attended, when you've had the same feeling, this dawning of like, when you're sitting in that workshop, you're like, I'm not being told anything. I'm being sold on things, where they spend more of their time trying to get you to buy their DVD set or their book, or more like
Or their
the
new
first
new platforms.
whatever it is. Yeah, their platform, their app, or they spend half the time talking about their bio, and you're like, there's no usable information here whatsoever, and it feels like a scam. And I remember going to an early DIY musician conference and feeling that way. Like, all these people here paid for the registration, they paid for flights and hotels, and they're just being sold to. And a lot of them were eating it up, which was because they were like, oh, this person has worked for like a big name artist. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So I was like, I want to use as many like tactical things as possible. And then when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for this year's event, I called up CD Baby, and they've been very supportive of like the workshops and that kind of thing that I've been doing over the years. But I was like, let's test something out. How about I'll volunteer to do this. I'll mentor a couple different artists from very different genres. I'll record every single conversation and make it totally public, so it's 100% transparent. We'll record all the data, like the web metrics, social, income, and we'll report it out so people see if these ideas actually work. I'm like, I'm not going to do any of the work for them. I'm just going to help them. I'm going to coach them. They're going to do the work, and the results are really going to be dependent on if they have the right attitude. Coaching wise, I can help them out. And so then we came up with this idea of the DIY Musician Accelerator project. So it was a 6-month mentoring. I would check in with them every other week. We originally thought, okay, 2 of them were going to tour to Austin for this in-person event. We were going to release albums. Of course, 3 weeks into this mentoring project, everything shut down. And then all my artists had all their gigs canceled. So we're like, how do we pivot? How do we take these same ideas that I've been swearing up and down for years work for people? How do I apply it in this situation? And so we just started testing out ideas, and the results were unbelievable. Like, even to myself, I was like really shocked, because they, in most cases, doubled their following and their streams and revenue. In one case, they got a 500% increase. So it was unbelievable, like the results that they got. And they built in processes that allowed them to stay creative and do more work than ever before. But this was very much like a test. And like, originally I was going to call it an incubator, and CD Baby thought it sounded too creepy. So that's how that kind of came about.
It's like you're going on a journey on a boat, and then you get, a tenth of the way there, and they say, get out. Now you're swimming. It's completely different than what you planned to do.
It was different, but I think all of the artists would agree that it turned out better than any of them could have imagined. Yeah. And I also wanted to make sure CD Baby had like help the artists as well. So each of them got a free 1,000 print digipack package and distribution deal. And like everyone, I think, learned a lot from it, and it was really great. And I really used them all on my podcast.
I remember the 2 guys in one of the pop punk bands that you were mentored, and they were like, one of the assignments you gave them, and they said, we did not want to do this. We were like, what is this? It was a bunch of paperwork about trying to find your audience, or thinking about who might be your audience. And I literally know those guys, because I've been in so many bands, and I'm looking at those guys going, you really are those guys who don't want to do any of this. But they had so many positive things to say about the experience, and it really helped them. And one of the brilliant things about that project might have been that you weren't able to go do it the regular way, because you guys had to come up with so many different ways to promote in this environment, and that there were 3 of them with you. So they were all very
That's what the industry is always doing anyways. It's always changing and shifting and stuff.
right.
Not this extent, but
It is.
Right.
And I would say that most of the time the industry is really behind. And so the people that do the best are those who see the future or even see the present and are able to make the adjustments before it's too late.
right.
And so, you know, the artists actually, it was like one-on-one coaching. So they didn't actually talk to each other unless they did behind my back, which they could have done because they started following each other and sharing ideas, which is great.
Listen, though, right?
Yeah, it actually ended up being really, really great. I was so excited to see that they were building relationships with one another. But like, yeah, it was very much like, what do we do here? What do we need to do to change? Because I believe that the best ideas around marketing, about music creation, about growth, they are not dependent on your circumstances. The best ones overcome the circumstances. If you're only following circumstantial things when it comes to the tactics that you utilize, that means you're going with a trend and you're not going with a proven method of actually achieving success.
And if you're going with the trend, you're following, not leading.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Right. Wow, that's great advice. Speaking of that, if you had maybe your top 3 or even just 1 or 2 ideas for that, like I said, one of yours that I honed in on was micro, not macro. If you had a few of those to give to artists or songwriters, anybody, I mean, this applies to anybody's business, really. It even, as I said, applies to ours. And so I'm going to be utilizing some of your things as we go forward. But if you had advice to give to, specifically musicians, what would be some of your top ones that you usually give?
Well, I always begin with their goals. Like I always say, like, what is it that you actually want to achieve and why? And, you know, you've heard this phrase, like people say you should have SMART goals, you know, goals that are specific, that are measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they're time bound. And I think people forget that. Like, so when you hear this phrase all the time from musicians, they're like, I just want to be a full-time musician. I'm like, what does that actually mean to you? Like, you're just playing music? Because I'm pretty sure like Beyonce and Lady Gaga live very differently than I do. And most artists that I know that are full-time musicians, like, what does it mean? What's your income level? Where are you living? What are you doing? Are you just cranking out songs for films? Are you performing on a stage? Because that's actually ultimately going to dictate the tactics that you use to get there. But I also try and remind folks that goals shouldn't be smart. They should be smarter. So I like to add 2 other things. They should involve everybody on your team. And I mean everyone. That means your band members need to be on board. That means your families need to be on board, because if they're not supportive, you're going to have some really difficult things to overcome later on. And then finally, those goals should be revisited often. What's the point of writing down a goal if you don't use it to like influence your day-to-day decision-making process? So I always say, like, break it down. And one of those musicians, in fact, the duo that you mentioned, Darrow and his bandmate Tyler, this was a good example of this, because when we first started talking, I was like, what is your ultimate goal? And he told me, because he has this incredible story of like getting a brain tumor and having to relearn how to speak and sing and play guitar. He's like, I'm always going to be dependent on this medicine for the rest of my life. So I know I can't do this. I'll always have to have a job that provides the best medical coverage. And he's like, but what I want to do is be able to tour, to make records and produce music videos and have it be for free, like, or break even at the end of the day, maybe get a couple guitars. And I was like, he kept thinking he needed a big label deal. And I was like, this is really attainable. I was like, let's break this down. I was like, how much does it cost for a record? He's like, well, I studied at Berkeley, so I could do a lot of the engineering myself. And I was like, okay, once we actually crunched the numbers, it turns out he only needed to make about $15,000 to $20,000 a year. I was like, okay, how much are you making on streams and sales and things like that? And once we actually broke it down, I was like, okay, all you have to do is grow about 60% and then you're already there. And it was like when it became possible, he approached it with much more enthusiasm. And then as we got the numbers, he realized it was very, very doable. And I was like, you could supplement this by endorsement deals, sponsorships, and other things. And that's when we really got to unlock that creativity. So knowing what you want and why you want it is key, because you have to know where you're going. And then as you're making those decisions, you can realize, does this decision get me closer to the goal or further from the goal? The second thing that I tell musicians is like,
Can I just say, I want to say something on that note. Don't forget where your next one is. That just made me realize, once again, a light bulb has gone on. I've had so many musicians, some very close to me, who have said, I can't do the business side because it takes me away from the creative. But with him, when you actually showed him the business side, it actually opened that up for him to where he doesn't feel tied to the business side. And I think that's the problem with most musicians these days, is it seems so overwhelming, the business side, that they can't, you start to present it to them. And I've noticed this with some of our clients. They're like, what did you just say? I don't even know the term of the first word you just said, much less how to get there. And so I feel like it's an art, whatever the business side people and mentors can do to let those musicians understand, hey, let's break this down, just like you did, into very, very tangible numbers. Then I feel like the artist could look at it and go, okay, there it is. If I can do that, then I can continue to do this creative. So thank you for sharing that, because I'm sorry, but I just went over that and explained it in my own way. But
oh, no worries.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think what ends up happening is you're right in that folks get overwhelmed, but the feeling overwhelmed at the end of the day, like, is understandable as it is, it's an excuse. And excuses, no matter how strong they are, do not lead to achievement. They do not get you close to your goals. So you have to think, if I am standing in the way of my goals, which we usually are the biggest obstacle to ourselves, like for our own goals, how do I get out of the way? How do I stop making excuses and start making progress? Either you learn the skill or you learn about it, so that when you hire someone else to do it, that you understand what they're talking about, they don't rip you off. Like, these are really, really crucial for those things. If musicians can figure out things like performing rights organizations and sync licensing and copyright registration, which are like a lot to deal with, if you can figure out how to tour and survive, you can figure out the business side of things. And oftentimes when you understand it, it actually does unlock a lot more of that creative power, because you feel that sense of freedom. And so that actually leads to my second biggest piece of advice that I provide to musicians, which is to put as much creative energy into the business side as they do in the songwriting side. Like, when it comes to making music, we don't respect artists that, or all they do is create a carbon copy of another artist. There's nothing interesting about that. It's not even art. It's just replication, right? Like, the artists who are truly doing innovative things, or even if they do cover songs, if they put their own unique spin on it, we're like in awe of that. Yet at the same time, why are musicians only copying the strategies of another artist? Like, oh, this person did this campaign, that's how they messaged that, that's how they created their YouTube thumbnail, I'm going to do those same things. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's not authentic, it's not genuine. So we should be using that same level of creative energy and inspiration and drive in putting it into the music side of things. And when you approach social like that, when you approach your email list like that, or how you book shows, or how you kind of deal with like any kind of agreement in your group, then all of a sudden you're going to have a career like no one else has. It's going to be truly yours.
I love the concept of that authenticity. That is what makes great artists great. You know, even if you don't, I mean, I love artists, even if I don't like the music, if I feel that they're authentic, there's something that draws me in to listen to something I might not otherwise listen to, from the authenticity. I love the idea of applying that authenticity to the business side. That's great.
Well, whether you're chasing a music career or you're trying to get a date, we know one thing: desperation does not sell. Like, nobody wants a desperate artist. Nobody wants a desperate date. You need somebody who truly believes in themselves. And if you really believe in your own career, you'll invest in it. And that's the way I see it. It's like, and part of that investment, of course, is doing the hard work, doing the stuff that you don't want to do so you could do the stuff that you really love doing.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Those are great, great goals and things. I am looking at my notes. Beth, do you have anything else to ask?
I have 1,000 things to ask, but
No, we can go forever, but it'll be next year.
we might have to have Simon back in 6 months or a year if he'll come back.
Sure.
And we will post all of his links, and I'm going to post the Supreme Court arguments, which are interesting. If you're kind of a little bit of a nerd like Simon and I are, it's very interesting to listen to the arguments. And you can, now I'm going to listen to them again and think of you sitting there. Nobody's listening to me. I'm going to listen.
Yeah, I want to say
and things. But Dawn, you wanted to talk about the Strive together too.
Oh yes, I want you to just talk a little bit about you have is this a new nonprofit you're working with?
Correct. I just joined the Strive Together team a couple months ago.
Tell us about that. Yes.
So it's a nonprofit that is like a member network. I kind of describe their work as like the people behind the people. So rather than being the nonprofits on the ground working directly with students, we actually coach and convene all of those nonprofits. So about 70 communities, we take the best practices, we collect data, and we reshare it amongst the groups so that people can kind of do better work more efficiently. And we're working with, through the network, roughly 12 million students now to help provide better outcomes. So it's really much a passion project of mine because I actually love education, even though I was a college dropout at one point. Like I see it as, yeah, it's.
Simon, I dropped out for music as well. I went on
there you go.
touring. So, what can I say?
You got to do what you got to do. But I see it as a tool, and especially for kids that, don't get a fair shake in this world. Like I don't believe that kids should be limited by their race, by their zip code, by how much money their families make. They should get an equal shot at things. And so it's awesome being a part of a team that's working towards this area. And so, I just started working with them a few months ago, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And so nonprofit work, especially around advocacy, is something that definitely speaks to my heart.
Great. That's so awesome. We need to keep in touch with you. What is the best way do you have an Instagram where you're posting about these things, or?
My Instagram feed is probably mostly pictures of my dog. It's very much a personal thing, but you can find me on social at Simon the Tam on, almost any network. These days, I actually haven't really been using a lot of social myself. It's just kind of focusing on taking care of my family. And, it's kind of funny because I've done so much work in that world. Like I consult for Google and Facebook, and I develop like higher ed curriculum on social media marketing and teach artists how to do this. But when it comes to my own stuff, I'm like, I don't really like it.
But there's a lot out there. The TED Talks, you've done, a lot of things on C-SPAN and testimony and all sorts of different things. You can find Simon if you're more interested in just listening to him talk about all sorts of things. He's kind of all over the place. So
I just want to say on your LinkedIn, your skills list: innovation, entrepreneurism, social justice, and compassion. I love that. The last word is the best one. And I think we can end on that today, because we can tell, Simon, that you are a compassionate person who has been advocating and doing so much in the world. And we were just so excited about this interview today. Thank you so much. We wish you well in what's going forward in your life. You're doing all kinds of new things. I think in 6 months you'll be doing other things. So people need to keep a follow on you and at Simon the Tam.
And for us, you can find us at amatterofmusic.com. We have our podcast going, and anywhere you listen to podcasts, we also are on YouTube. If you would like to watch, if you were listening, if you'd like to watch this on YouTube, and we'll put all the links on the YouTube version of this podcast. We also have a class coming up on sync, and we have another one that's more of a general one coming up at the beginning of the year. So if you'd like to check out anything, amatterofmusic.com, and please like this, push that little button down there. That helps us a lot. Thank you so much, Simon, for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We appreciate having you today. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.